Hello, and thank you for taking the time to join us on this webinar, The Future of AI-Driven Chatbots. This is the first in a series of webinars where we'll be talking to industry experts about cutting-edge developments in the world of content. First, some housekeeping. This is being recorded and we'll make it available as soon as possible after the webinar is finished. Now, some introductions. That's me. I'm Rick Page, Director of Sales and Marketing for Bluestream. But tonight's webinar isn't really about me. It's more about talking with an expert. And our expert this evening is Rahel and Bailie, the founding and CEO of Content Seriously Consulting, a boutique consultancy in London that specialises in sorting out thorny content problems for clients who seriously want to use their content as a business asset. She is an STC and an ISTC fellow, a university lecturer and an accredited cognitive edge consultant. Rahel is well known in the content industry with books, I've got one, awards and accolades to her name. She spent the last few decades helping companies make sense of their content operations and related areas and teaching various content courses where she looks at content very seriously. Also tonight we're joined by Jackie Crouch, who looks after business development at Bluestream, and Jackie will be following up and field in any questions that you have after this webinar is finished. So with that, we're going to move on to our very first question for Rahel. And our very first question for Rahel is, are you seeing an increase in chatbot use across all industries?
Well, actually, yes, I am seeing an increase in chatbot use. Now, I have to tell you that sometimes it's just novelty. Right now, it's that cool thing that everybody else has. So the same way we had this push to social media. By the way, I'm on camera, so hi everybody.
Yeah.
You can see me in my little home office here. So you do see it as a novelty thing, a novelty add-on channel in a lot of places, and other places actually have a business need for it. So it's a little bit kind of all over the place right now. Someone just sent me an interesting quote from Microsoft saying that most bots are built by developers or data scientists rather than customer service experts. And so that explains why only a third of respondents report having their issue resolved by a bot, while 2/3 transferred to an agent or simply gave up. So chatbots aren't there yet, but I think we're still in the infancy and we're going to see a lot more. But as people as some companies drop off their chatbot use and others come on, that we'll start to see an evening out of chatbots where they need to be used as opposed to chatbots for a novelty use. I actually had an interesting experience a couple of weeks ago where I had 2 bookings with a travel package travel agency, and when I wanted to find information about my reservation, when I did it on my phone, it came up with the wrong reservation. And then when I went to the website, I got the right reservation. No, it was the other way around. I got it on my phone, but I didn't want to type on my phone. So I went onto the website and I got the chatbot there, and it could only find the other reservation. And so it wanted to know which reservation I had. So I typed in Iceland because I'm supposed to be going to Iceland in March, COVID willing. And it said, it looks like you're typing in a swear word. Could you please rephrase? I'm thinking, it's the name of a country. This is a pretty bad chatbot, but it wouldn't, I couldn't get it to work. So I eventually had to abandon it and call customer service. So these are the kinds of things that we're seeing right now.
So I think that follows on to our second question, which is what kind of chatbots are you seeing at the moment?
Well, I'm seeing a few kinds, and I've kind of made my own categories for them because I haven't seen kind of a taxonomy of chatbots yet. I haven't seen categorizations of them, so I've created my own categories. So I call like they're simple chatbots, and these are the ones that you see on the home pages of websites where they have a few simple commands. It's like the simple chatbot. And I could also group in there certain kinds of industrial chatbots. So they're chatbots that do something very specific and it has a very narrow focus. So for example, helping you through a process. So you have steps 1 through 5 and it'll do step 1. And then when you get stuck, it can do step 2, step 3. But it's very limited. It's not that kind of the kind of personal assistant, the Alexa or whatever that you could get. Then there are complex. And complex could be anything that has machine learning through to deep learning, and artificial intelligence in the back. So you have, I would put complex into that category. I would put a voice assistants like Siri, Alexa, or the G word, which we can't say. I can't say in my room because otherwise we'll get a rude interruption here. And so these are complex because there's it could go in any direction, and you have to interpret what people say in a very unanticipated way. So I can ask a question about the weather, and I can say, what's the weather outside, or what's the temperature, or do I need a raincoat, or like there are many ways I could ask a question, and there has to be some sort of interpretation in there. And so that's complex. And I put complex into like where I used to work at Babylon Health, where they had a medical model, like an AI model for medical conditions. So when you would ask a question, then depending on how you answered the question, that the AI model could go into some other node, do some processing, and then return an answer. And if you answered yes to one and or no, it might go into 2 different nodes, pull out information, bring it back, and then continue on. So that's also a complex. So there's levels of complexity as well. Right? It was very focused. It was focused on looking at symptoms and then trying to come up with a diagnosis. They didn't call it a diagnosis, but it's a quasi-diagnosis. So you have that kind of thing. So any industry that has a lot of complexity to it would fit into that category. And then there's this other category, which might be one chatbot, but you have multiple clients. So you've got that maybe this company licenses its chatbots to people in finance or insurance or healthcare or administration or government or wherever. And so they end up having multiple sets of content that have to apply to the logic that they've built. And so the logic may change, but also the content will definitely change. It's not like the same content for every customer. So I think of it as almost as a grid. You've got simple, complex, and multi-client, and then you've got industrial, unanticipated, and then multiple clients as well.
Thank you. I have to say that the audience, because we decided to do this type of webinar where we're just talking and I've just got the questions up, the audience are missing the way that you talk and explain things, which, like me, your hands are waving everywhere as you actually talk.
Well, hold on a minute. We can fix that. Give me a minute. I'm just going to bring up my standing desk so that I'm not sitting down. And I'm going to just push my chair out of the way here. And then we can turn on the video for me. If you want to stay on camera, that's fine. But there we go. Whoops.
We'll see if that works with the next one, because I can see your passion and interest and everything coming through in heaps, which is really a a shame to not share that with everybody. So the
Go ahead and turn on the camera. That's fine.
the third question was how are people creating these at the moment?
Oh my goodness, you have no idea. Well, so there are kind of three ways. Either there's a proprietary system, so you kind of buy this chatbot DIY kit, or there's a homegrown solution where you've got a few data scientists and some various people, and they just kludge something together. And then there's the Excel spreadsheet. And I kid you not, I have just spent a few days talking to everyone I know, almost, I have a few people left, who are doing, they're conversation designers, and they are doing conversation design, writing for chatbots, creating conversations, and it's done in Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets. And then they do the mapping in kind of flow charting software, kind of like Lucid Charts or one of those. And they said, what's really crazy is that if you decide that you've forgotten something up near the root, you then put it in. So, you add a row and you put in information in your spreadsheet, and then you have to go into Lucid and add that in and then renumber everything manually. And sometimes this can be quite the ordeal. But that's where we are right now with the content for the chatbots. So I'm not talking about the chatbots themselves, the logic. I'm talking about the content that goes into the chatbots. It's really so basic right now because the technologists are busy solving the last mile. They want to make life easier for themselves. So they have ways of, making sure all this gets presented properly. But the management of the content in the back end, we have the same problem that we have everywhere, which is that people don't really understand how much work goes into the actual production. So the content operations side, nothing. There's nothing for writers yet.
Right. So that takes me on to our fourth question. I'm going to go into this in a bit more detail. I'm going to show you on the screen again in a moment. But so what is it that you think people are missing here?
Well, what I think people are missing is all about the operational efficiencies. So if you have, no word of a lie, I was in a situation where they didn't know what to do with the content, and they had 15 languages, and they didn't know how to get the content synchronized. So they're going, oh, let's use the translation management system as a content management system. And it was a disaster, absolute disaster. And but because they didn't realize that there were other potential things out there, even using a CCMS, which is sometimes I can see the benefit of doing that, and other times I think it would be an unmitigated disaster as well. But because they don't know the range of tools that are out there, they just think this is great because it's better than a quill. So I think that part of it's missing. There's no operational efficiency there. So the creation processes are ignored, as I was saying before, by the technologists. They don't really think about how you write things. And I was speaking to someone recently, very recently, about the need to operationalize content. And he goes, well, the content gets built into the model. And I'm going, no, like the creation. And he's like, what creation? Like for them, it's kind of like, when you're going to have a baby, and like there's this baby, and they don't think about, well, it took 9 months to make that baby, right? So they don't think about, hey, it took time to create this content. It doesn't just spring magically from somewhere and you suck it into the model. Someone actually has to sit down and create it. And he just couldn't wrap his head around it. It was like I was speaking, some foreign language that he couldn't understand. And this is someone who really should know better. So, there are content, again, ends up being this little pocket that no one wants to think about, even though that's what people see on screen. There's no interface. There's no, I mean, there is a very basic interface, but you know, it isn't some big interface. It's an audio interface or a chat, you know, back and forth type interface. That's it. So all you see is content, yet they're missing that whole thing of how you bake the content is important. And they're not really thinking about what I would call the natural working rhythm of conversation designers. So when you think about you're writing some content, and you know, here's kind of two potential scenarios. One is if you know what a CCMS is, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what one is, I'll kind of explain. Is that if you have content stored in components in some sort of a repository or a database, then you probably have it grouped by topic, because you say, okay, I'm going to write about things on my desk. So I'm going to write about monitors, and there's all the specs to the monitor and how you use it and troubleshooting for it and so on. I'm going to keep all that together, because if something comes along that I have to update, I want to see everything about monitors. I want to see everything about my laptop. I want to see everything about the mouse or the keyboard or whatever it might be, right? And so if you say, well, I have chatbot content about that topic, well, I can keep it with that topic, because you know, chances are if you're in a hurry and so on, you don't want to be thinking about this content and then, yeah, I have to remember to tell so-and-so who's working from home in another country to remind them about monitors and to ask them if they've updated that, right? So you want to keep all of it together, because that way something changes, you can kind of scan, and like, this is stuff for the website, this is stuff for the app, this is stuff for somewhere else, the knowledge base, this is for the intranet, and oh yeah, this is for the chatbot. Okay, it's all right, I'll update these pieces, done, right? So that's how a conversation designer would work, or well, you know, any content developer would work. Now, in some cases that works well. In other cases, it might work against you, because you might have all of these little pieces of content that need to be strung together into a flow. And that flow needs to be signed off in situ. Like, that's a, you know, it's a regulatory requirement. You can't just sign off the word yes and the word no. You have to sign off, you know, do you have a headache? Yes or no. If you answer yes, then here are the questions they ask, like, where on the head does it hurt? And they give you 4 options. And if you say no, then it will ask you whatever the next logical question is. So if you're going to do that, then you have to think about how do I write it all out and have all the flows, and then be able to visualize it, because you might have different variants depending on if this is US English, UK English, Australian English, Canadian English, US regulations, Canadian regulations, and so on and so forth. You might have other things, you know, so you want to have the storage, and then you want to have the visualization, and then you want to have the publishing. And then there's the whole thing of workflow. So if you're trying to do that, then you have to kind of think about how you want to store your content, because at the same time that you want to keep it together in a flow, you also want to connect it to all these other topics that it should logically connect to, in case you need to do something with the maintenance of it. And it's not like anything else. I just spoke to someone from the Conversation Design Institute who said, you know, it's not the creation, it's the maintenance. And it's always the maintenance. If I were to think of content as a supply chain, in other words, I write it, I get it reviewed, I edit it, I get it approved, I send it off to the website, and I never look at it again. That's the supply chain. Great. How often does that happen? Never. What happens is that now something happens and you have to review the content. You have to either just do a regular audit, or there's an emergency update, or there's a change in circumstances so it's a scheduled update. And then you have to go find the content, find where it's stored, find all the versions that might be floating around out there, find out whose drive it's in, and so on and so forth. It can get really crazy. And I said, I always add on 50% extra time for maintenance. And he said, oh yeah, at least 50% extra time. So it's the same thing in conversation design. You start running around going, oh, which flows does this affect, and so on and so forth. So it can get a little crazy.
Okay, so I think that leads us really nicely onto our next question, which was around software and a bit more into the processes used for the creation of chatbots.
Mm-hmm. So, well, I just talked about how spreadsheets seem to be the vehicle of choice for for conversation design, and they're not even using Airtable or something that gives you a little bit more functionality. It's all just like Google Sheets because it's online and it's shareable. But then you need some sort of a visualization. So you need workflow. They don't really have that. And there is a gap also in the creation and where you store it. So there is visualization software, but that assumes that you're creating your content in spreadsheets. So you could license visualization software so that you can see the flows. It looks a little bit like a mind map. Okay, that's fine. But it doesn't really help you at the creation end. Like, how do you spell check this? Well, you use whatever spell check you can unleash on Google Sheets, I guess. How do you standardize your tone of voice? There is software out there like Congri or Acklinks or whatever to be able to do that, but chances are nobody's doing that. They're just throwing some spreadsheet software at people and saying go, and just kind of figure it out as you go along. So if you've got a whole bunch of people working on a chatbot that you have to kind of synchronize across tone and voice, and we were doing this manually back in the 1990s. This is 30 years later. We should have kind of improved by then. Someone was telling me about a chatbot that they worked on for a Middle Eastern city where it was like in Arabic, Chinese, and English, and the challenges that localization threw into the mix, and the whole right to left and left to right, and all of these things that you have to think about. So in some ways, so it's kind of like a Venn diagram. There's the content ops challenges that we have for product content, and then there are the challenges for chatbot content, and there is a good overlap. I'd say a 50% overlap in the middle of all of these challenges are the same. Different genre and different subgenres of content, but they're the same. But then you have things that are specific to chatbot content, and specific to chatbot content, depending on whether it's the simple one, the complex one, the multi-client one, and so on. So it's, I think it's time that we start using tech kind of off-label. So do you know what I mean by off-label? Like there was this medication that was meant to help with cataracts, but it turns out it also made eyelashes longer, and all of a sudden the beauty industry jumped on that because like, ooh, we can give this to women who want longer eyelashes, or like Botox, right? It had a medical reason for creating it, and now it's used by the beauty industry. So this is called using something off label. So maybe it's time to use some of the software that we use for other things in an off-label way. I mean, people jump on things like GitHub, which are really not too useful for content things, but people use it anyways because it's what they have and they're desperate, and the technologists know how to use it, so they use that off-label. But when it comes to using other content off-label, sometimes there's resistance there. They go, oh, but that's for technical writing. It's like, never mind that it's for technical writing. That's just a genre. It's not, It's like saying, oh, you can only use Word for letters, not for poetry. It doesn't make any sense. So I think it's time to start using software kind of off-label until someone invents some software that's purpose built. And I've looked into that. If I had, and this might be a challenge to people out there, if I had a bit more money and a bit more kind of resources behind me, I would just jump in and start creating something that people could use. But I don't think I'm in that league.
No.
So when we think about the technologists and the decision makers, they're focused on the delivery. They don't really care how it happens in the back. And I call this fixing Deliveroo. So if you know Deliveroo, it's one of those services, it's like Uber Eats, or one of those services that rushes food to your door when you order it, which is all well and good, but you can fix Deliveroo all you want. But if the kitchen is in a disastrous state where they've given 10 cooks a pot and 3 spoons, you're not going to get your food any faster, because you have to back it up. You can't just fix the last mile and not worry about what's up front. So I think this is where we're at right now, is everyone's like on that last mile because that's what they see.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And obviously from a CCMS side, we talk a lot about how delivery is important. And I've many a times I've said to people, people don't really care how it gets there. They don't care about
exactly.
What they want to see is the documentation.
They care when there's a mistake.
Yeah.
Right.
that is the point. So really, as a last question before we move on, and we've got some good questions from the audience already, and I hope there'll be a couple more, is, how do you think this is going to affect content creators? One thing, can you see traditional technical authors being dragged into this whole conversation creation side and things?
Well, it's interesting because I've watched this from the beginning, and for a while they were saying, hire screenwriters and television writers who because they know how to get the conversational tone in there. And there was that part of me that was just cringing and thinking like, oh my goodness, this is this is the last thing you want to do. So I think I think it's a wide range of writers who can do this. I think the people who are doing like UX writing, or people who are conversational designers, and tech writers, I think they all have a place, because you've got things that need to be really exact. You have things that need to be very friendly. You have things that need to be very decision-based, and that might take slightly different skills. So I don't think it's one of those things that you can just kind of go, you're a writer, ding, and you can write, for anything. I think there will be people who are more suited to one or the other. I think tech writers have a really good advantage, and I'm going to say something that's probably going to be very controversial, but I think of UX writers as tech writers, because all the things that the UX writers are doing now on the website, tech writers did and still do on the industrial side. So it's writing error messages, it's writing in-app, embedded assistance, it's doing all those things. But tech writers know how to use more sophisticated software, whereas UX writers are doing it all in Excel spreadsheets. So when it comes right down to it, they're doing the same thing. It's called something different, and it's using different tooling. So if I was going to introduce something into the market that had all this complexity to it, it's probably an ex-tech writer who would go, oh, I can do that because I know how to manipulate the software, where somebody else might run screaming into the distance. But I don't think it's exclusively, one group or another group. I think there are things to be learned, like the Conversation Design Institute has an actual course on how to write for conversational design. So you need people with the right skills. Right now, there are no tools. They might have the right skills, but no tools. And then you have people that have tools, but maybe not the right skills. And I think it's going to take some time for that to kind of align, right? So there might be, STC, if anyone's here from STC, maybe a conversation design for technical writers. And there could be a course of, how to manage writing in, specialized chatbot software for conversational designers. So, I think we're going to cross-pollinate. It's going to be an interesting time because I think there's room for everybody because there's so many different kinds of chatbots and uses for them. So if you look at, I was going to give it an example. I can't think of one right now, but when I was part of the Information 4.0 consortium, which is kind of, we're in the process of winding it down as a legal entity and just starting it up as a community. We were talking about kind of granular, well, beyond granular, molecular content. So this is kind of, chatbot length content or Internet of Things length content. And how do we share best practices and so on? So, there's going to be places where we can share that information. And when I'm looking at some of the presentations that were out there, university projects and so on, I realized what a vast array of applications it has. And so it's not just, those three kinds of chatbots that you happen to interact with last week. There's a whole bunch of things out there that you never see because you're not the customer of an industrial pump, So, there's lots out there. And so I think it's going to become a skill set that everyone needs to incorporate in some way. And then there will be people who love doing it full time and other people who will kind of do it off the side of their plate.
Thank you. I mean, that's our question. I have a question that springs to mind before we move on to some of the questions that have been submitted. How many or how much use of taxonomy are you seeing within these chatbots? Are people making use of it? And further to that, have you seen any use of ontology as an approach to actually add some intelligence or upselling, cross-selling type, sharing different information at the same time? Or do we add that
what's
to
really
our new product?
interesting is I see a lot of resistance to taxonomies by data people because they just want to use reference data sets for everything. It's like, well, what's that saying about, like, if you have to a carpenter, every nail needs a hammer or something like that, or something about nails and hammers, right? And it's a little bit like that. They just kind of go data sets. We want to use data sets. We don't want to use a taxonomy. I don't know what the answer is. I can see a lot of potential for it, and I have seen some organizations say, okay, we're going to need to do this with the taxonomy. It's usually when it hits a certain level of complexity, and then they're going, how are we going to do that? And I go, remember the taxonomy we talked about? That could handle all of this. And then they go, now I get it, right? Because they don't get it until they experience it. And so once they experience, like, oh, how are we going to manage this in 15 languages or 5 languages or whatever it may be, then that's their pain point, where they decide it's too complex. Or in another one, it might be that they have only one language, but they have a whole bunch of markets and they've got a whole bunch of audience segments within that market, and they go, oh, how and then, taxonomy or ontology. So I think that it's going to be part of that growth thing.
Fair enough. So I'm just going to see if I can do this in an easier way. I think that's going to work. So if we move on to questions, the first question we have, which I like, is in using topic components as source for chatbots. What are your thoughts about using labeled micro documents that reside within the structured topic to source more precise answers?
Well, I've been thinking of that actually, and that's what I kind of alluded to before, is that in some cases that will work perfectly. In other cases, it won't work. So, for example, let's use that headache example. Do you have a headache? So you can put that in with your headache topic. Now, then the next word is yes and no. Where do you put that? Because in some languages, you don't say yes or no. You would say, I have a headache or I don't have a headache, but there is no actual real word for yes or no. So where do you put those? So maybe you put yes and no in with the topic, and now you put yes and no in with another topic. And now you go, all right, so when you answer yes, then it will ask you where in your head. And then it might ask you, have you fallen and banged your head? Where do you put that? With what topic? Right? So in that case, it wouldn't work. But in the case of maybe industrial stuff where it's configuring your really complicated industrial equipment, maybe that's perfect for it, where you have the topic and you have the name, the short description, and then you have a specialized topic or a specialized tag called a bot content, and you have something that's tokenized and it gets passed along and so on. But it's not a one size fits all. I don't think it's a one size fits all. But I like that. I like instinctively, I kind of go, yeah, if I'm dealing with monitors and laptops and keyboards, I want the content about monitors to be with monitors, even if it's in the chatbot. I want the things about keyboards to be there, even if it's in the chatbot. But then you get into those more nebulous areas, and you kind of go, yeah, it's not going to work in that case. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So our second question is, again, another really good question. How important is it for a chatbot to be able to use previous utterances by the user to understand the user's intent versus treating everything the user says as a different, separate question?
Right. Well, I think that depends on how the AI model is built. So when I talked about the medical part, that takes an utterance and then translates it into a query, which then then goes and gets an answer. So depending on all the previous answers that you've given, so all the utterances are cumulative, right? So it's kind of trying to mimic the way a doctor would interview you, right? Are you dizzy? If you say yes, then you might ask something about blood pressure. You might ask something about salt intake. You might ask something about what do they call that? The inner ear disturbance. So they might ask a bunch of questions that are really unrelated, but it's a cumulative effect. Whereas in other areas, it may not be as sophisticated, so it doesn't need to keep track of those previous utterances. It knows that you're on step 3 of the installation for this and this and this configuration, that model, that engine size, whatever it may be. And so it doesn't need to keep track of the previous utterances. But I don't think that's a content thing. I think they have to tell you how you're building it, and then you have to develop content for it. And I use this as an example in that if you have something like an OnStar, right? And you say, hey, OnStar, I'm driving and my front right tire is pulling. What's the tire pressure? Well, that would send a signal up to the server. The server would go read the sensor. The sensor would, bring something back. And depending on if you had like 3 states, red, amber, green. So green state would be tire pressures between this and this, keep driving. Amber would be that it's either too low or too high, but it's still safe. Just, go to a service station soon. And red state would be, oh my goodness, tire's going to blow, pull over. So if they program 3 states, then you need to write for those 3 states, whether or not somebody actually ever uses that content. Like you hope nobody ever has to use the red state content, but because they programmed it, you need to have something that can be spoken back afterwards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, the more you talk, the more I get thinking from a CCMS perspective, really, about how when this is all evolving content and you're trying to evolve the chatbot content, how you're actually managing those changes if you're just relying on
So in that case,
spreadsheets.
if you think about it, in that case, a CCMS would be perfect because you have, this is about tire pressure. And so tire pressure, and then you write the 3 states and you write the, you know, the questions, and you get the synonyms right, and you use your knowledge graph, and that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, because a lot of the content is already there to read.
Exactly.
Once you get to that point, you can trigger it and say, we can bring that particular topic in that says, this is how you do this. And that's how you check it. And that makes sense. So a couple more questions if you've got time.
Sure.
This one you may want to read on the public chat because, Michael's put, longer term, we're considering the future use of merging domain content and multitask scenario knowledge graphs as models to dynamically mine, retrieve, organize, and deliver content combined with inbound personalization in brackets signals to tailor. Your thoughts on that? I think that's a little bit about what you've just been talking about.
So I was trying to find that while you were reading.
It's right down the bottom.
I see here. We're considering the future of merging domain content multitask scenario. I think that, I'm sorry to do this, but it's like the traditional consultant's answer. It depends. So I think what you need to do is, a typical content strategy exercise where you do a discovery. You have to interview people. You look at requirements. You look at how, it's for content operations. You have to look at how the content developers work. And then and you can do a little pilot project in, process A and process B to see what works better. Because you don't know until you try it. Like I call it prescriptions as opposed to, principles and not prescriptions, because you cannot apply something in a cookie cutter way. So you need to know how people need to work to be able to figure out what's the best way of storing the content. Because even in that situation where I'm talking about medical content, so you can't really keep it in a CCMS, but you'd say, okay, but if we had the other content in a CCMS, could we transclude the content into this, like reverse transclude it? So it's in the chatbot repository, and then it shows up where it needs to show up. You can't change it there, but at least it's there. So when you're doing your scan, you see it. It becomes visible. It becomes that visual reminder. And then, you open it and it actually takes you to the source in the chatbot, and then you fix it there. Like there's that, I'm kind of doing these mental gymnastics on how would the best way be for a conversation designer to work. And so I haven't come up with any solution yet, but I have a lot of ideas.
Thank you. I think there's some really interesting comments on the chat, but less questions now, I think.
I see that Meka has
I feel slightly
there, yes.
I feel slightly obliged, I have to say, that if you're looking at a CCMS that can support this type of thing, then we can have a separate conversation. And certainly with regards to our support, again, that's something certainly we can do at Bluestream, and it's something that we're the part of the reason for this webinar is it's conversations we're getting brought into now, and it is an exciting time and an interesting time. It sounds a little bit like the Wild West out there at the moment, and there is a definite need for somebody to get a really good grip on this and come up with a sensible, scalable solution.
Definitely. And it has to be flexible enough that it can work for that grid, that simple industrial, complex, and multi-client. It has to be able to work for all of them. And so you have to be able to configure it in a way that's going to make sense.
So that's brilliant. So we've run over our time, um, but thank you for everybody who's stayed on the call. I have to say, Rahel, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting, and I think the comments that I'm seeing in the messages, really, I think the audience have also enjoyed it. So thank you very much, everyone here. We will make this recording available as soon as possible. Probably tomorrow. I might cut out the bit where we were having some technical difficulties, so it looks like we were perfect from the beginning. My colleague Jackie will be in touch, or if you have any questions, if you filter those through Jackie, she'll make sure it gets to Rahel or me or both, whoever's actually to both, because we'll talk about these. There's a couple of Twitter handles. If you don't already follow Rahel, please do. And again, similarly, if you don't already follow Bluestream and Xdocs, please do. And thank you all for the attention, and good evening.
Thank you. Good night.